Good morning, or I guess it's afternoon now. It's wonderful to see you all here. I'm thrilled for the presentation of the Chicago Tribune's Heartland Prizes for fiction. A few brief program notes. There will be an opportunity for questions later in the program, so please, when that moment comes, raise your hand and an usher with a microphone will be with you right away. And at the conclusion, there will be a book signing adjacent to the lobby, and please don't despair if you fail to bring a book with you, because the wonderful Unabridged bookstore has plenty of them. And please visit the Chicago Tribune table, where you'll find books by many of my colleagues. So without further ado, the Heartland Prize. So there's a saying these days, you just can't make this stuff up. Well, great fiction anticipates the unthinkable. It's like the sonar device that detects the mysterious world submerged beneath the sea beyond the imagination. Fiction imagines a world that's unknowable, not yet visible. And it turns out you really can make this stuff up, because way before Black Lives Matter, way before Freddie Gray died in Baltimore, Chang-rae imagined it as an American city in the future. He imagined an American city on steroids, on fast forward. Class stratifications separated Be-more into haves and have-nots, those who make things, those who consume them. One is a wealthy enclave where food's contaminated. There's complete security and safety. The other is anarchic wilderness. The story is told in a first-person plural voice, and the nameless, faceless residents of Be-more recount the story of Fan, the impish girl from China who resides in the work settlement and is employed as a tank driver, securing delicacies for the powerful people. And in certain ways, On Such a Full Sea is a road trip. It's a kind of futuristic odyssey. In a larger sense, though, the novel's about the decline of American city and a twist on the American immigration story. This is a world so divided that mobility is impossible. And without dreams, the residents all end up cut off from one another. They're in individual silos and devoid of moral center. In the past, the Heartland Prize has recognized writers who've engaged and subverted the American immigration myth. Previous winners, Americana, Chimamanda Adichie, Lazarus Project by Alexander Hemon, they revise and rejuvenate the traditional American immigration story. They updated it and twisted it to more closely reflect the reality of the funhouse mirror it really is. In that tradition, Chang-rae Lee takes the immigration story to another dimension, the future. He's created a magical, forceful novel that wrestles with the big questions: loss and displacement, class and ethnicity, power and impotence. The Heartland Prize is established 30 years ago. They're not bound by region or ideology. It's not a particular place. They're guided by values about literature and the world. They recognize books from the metaphorical heart of the nation and the metaphorical heart of the human experience. Stuart Dybek, a wonderful writer, great friend to readers and writers, describes the Heartland this way: as the complex mix of passion and empathy we term the human heart. On Such a Full Sea is such a scary novel. So many novels show us where we've been, but On Such a Full Sea shows us where we are going. The world can be a lonely place, but books take us to places we may not yet have ever imagined, places we may be afraid to go alone. They provide comfort and courage. And this is a book that does that. So I'm honored to present the prize to Chang-rae Lee, and welcome Chang-rae Lee and Printers Row Journal Jennifer Day to the stage, and I will present the award to Chang-rae Lee.
Thank you all for coming today. So I thought we would start with a brief reading, just to sort of set the stage and to give those who maybe haven't had a chance to read the book yet a sense of what the book is and what it sounds like from the author himself.
Yeah. Good afternoon. It's great to be here. And thank you, the Tribune and the Humanities Festival. And it's just, it's a real honor to be here and be recognized along with all those other great writers Elizabeth mentioned. As Elizabeth mentioned, this book is narrated by a first-person plural, the we. So that's a little bit unusual. And so I thought I'd just read a page from the beginning. It is known where we come from, but no one much cares about things like that anymore. We think, why bother? Except for a lucky few, everyone is from someplace, but that someplace, it turns out, is gone. You can search it. You can find pics or vids that show what the place last looked like. In our case, a gravel-colored town of stoop-shouldered buildings on a riverbank in China, shorn hills in the distance, rooftops a mess of wires and junk, the river tea-still, a swath of black. And blunting it all is a haze that you can almost smell, a smell you think you don't want to breathe in. So what does it matter if the town was razed one day after our people were trucked out? What difference does it make that there's almost nothing there now? It was on the other side of the world, which might as well be a light year away. Though probably it was mourned when it was thriving. People are funny that way. Even the most miserable kind of circumstance can inspire a genuine throb of nostalgia. The blood was pumping, yes? Weren't we alive? You can bet that where we live now was mourned too in its time. And though it may be surprising to consider, someday this community might be remembered as an excellent place, even by those of us who recognize its shortcomings. But we don't wish to dwell on the unhappier details. Most would agree that any rational person would leap at the chance of living here in Bmore, given what it's like out there beyond the walls, in the open counties. And even those relative few who've secured a spot in the charter villages might find certain aspects of life here enviable, though they would definitely never say so. We, on the other hand, will offer this. You can rely on the time here, the tread of the hours. If you think about it, there's little else that's more important than having a schedule, and better yet, counting on that schedule. It helps one to sleep more soundly, to work steadily through one shift, maybe even to digest the hearty meals, and finally, to enjoy all the free time available to us, right up to the last minutes of the evening. Then, if the stars are out, and they do seem to be out most every night now, we can sit together in our backyards and wave a hand to neighbors over the fences and view our favorite programs while sitting in the open air and authentically believe that this stretch of sky sings its chorus of light for us alone. Thanks.
Thank you. So we're recognizing this book today because it speaks so clearly to our values here in the Heartland and in the United States, but the genesis for it actually stemmed from an idea and an interest you had in what was going on in China, actually.
Right.
So could you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, originally I had planned, and I think this has happened to me. I've published 5 books, and probably 4 of them have started out as some other kind of thing, a completely kind of different project. And this project was going to be a realistic novel about contemporary Chinese factory workers. I had gone over to, my sister lives in Hong Kong. We're Korean American, but she's an expat there with her husband. And I was set up through various channels to do research in the Pearl River Delta, where all those factories are that make everything that we know in this world and everything that we have on at this moment, you know. And I visited it. It's all centered around the pop-up megacity of Shenzhen, which, 15 years ago wasn't much, or 20 years ago wasn't much, but now is something like 15 million people. And so I did go over there to do all that research because I was thinking about writing a novel you know, maybe in the cast of Zola Germinal, you know, a novel about worker struggle, about certain kinds of injustices that were going on, about the rise and might of China, about just its ponderous weight in our world. And as an American citizen, that's, you know, I think that's where my people always ask, why are you so interested in China? I think we all have to be interested in China. It's just like wanting to be interested in the weather, you know, and how it's changing. So I did all that, and I visited these factories, and again, this particular factory I visited was fascinating and not a horrible place. And we could talk about that later. But when I came back from the trip, ready to go sit at my desk and write this novel about workers and the bosses and the community around them, I felt as if I wasn't really finding that particular angle into the story that I think a novel requires. You know, I didn't want to just write a representation of that. And that's not what novels are, I think. You know, they do report on what's out in the world, but to write a novel and to have a novel sustain itself, it needs another kind of scrim. And I guess I just didn't have a special one, particularly in regards to, relative to all the great articles you read about China in journalism and online, which I, you know, was a real avid reader of. So I kind of dropped that idea, you know, sort of depressed about it, and then came upon one day this idea about resetting the novel in a certain way and setting it in America. And it was all prompted by a trip on the Amtrak train from New York to Washington, D.C., where, you know, if those of you who know that line, it goes through Baltimore. And as someone who grew up in New York, I'd gone on that trip all through my life. And, you know, it's whatever it is as a trip. But one of the noteworthy things about that journey is that as you pull into Penn Station, Baltimore, in East Baltimore, and this is, you know, I was born in 1965, so from probably 1975 on, I saw this, you see this breathtaking, you know, the derelict community, the sort of community that was made famous by The Wire, a TV series. And over the years, I'd seen that community, right, in various states of disrepair, abandonment, some kind of renovation, but in this iteration, it seemed like it was just boarded up. You know, buildings were still there, and for all the many reasons why that community is that community, you know, and we know this from, you know, the discriminatory practices and post-industrial malaise after the war, post-war malaise after, you know, all the industries died down. It just struck me as just you know, the greatest tragedy that just as a citizen, just sitting on that train, I couldn't believe that I've been seeing this community for 30 years, 35 years of my life, and that nothing substantively had changed. And I got angry about it, and frustrated as an individual citizen might. I just said, what the heck are we doing here? And then I had this strange thought of, you know, there's this housing. It's not grand housing, but it's housing in the middle of a city that's revitalizing and you know, a good city. Why not allow people, if for some reason they're saying our citizens aren't allowed to use these tracts, why not let other people use these tracts? And then I had this strange idea to, you know, this funny notion about Chinese people from some ruined village in China, because I've been reading about all these environmental disasters in villages all across China where they do industrial mining. And then why not just invite 50,000 of them and let them have that neighborhood? Let them go at it. don't have to give them anything, you know, and let's see what happens. And so this is what Elizabeth mentioned about a certain kind of speculative immigrant novel that I was thinking about. And thinking about a novel in which a community would, unlike most immigrant stories where people come over, you know, family by family, that this was en masse.
Right. So, although, I mean, this is, in the book, clearly this community has displaced those who have been there previously, primarily African Americans.
Right.
And when you were writing this was before the days of Freddie Gray, before the riots that we saw after that. So can you talk a little bit about the undercurrents of race and ethnicity in the book? They're not quite at the forefront, but they're certainly there.
Yeah, it's not what the book is about in any way. But again, it's from the immigrant community's point of view of what I would say is their willful denial of what was there before. Right. It's just much more convenient for them not to think about so much the kinds of people and the struggles that those people had as newcomers, and which is a kind of tension that I grew up with in New York City in the 1980s, in neighborhoods in Brooklyn and in Queens, where, you know, and it's a story it's a cyclical immigrant story in many ways, about a new community and maybe exploitative in certain ways, regenerative in others, struggling with the people who had been there before. And so there is some acknowledgement of that. Mm-hmm. And also, of course, that acknowledgement is, you know, a kind of subconscious reflection of, well, who are we now in this community? We are now the locals. Right. We are now the denizens. And what do we expect from our legacy? And so I wanted to write this immigrant novel about a community that was cloistered, really set behind a certain barriers, and who had a particular function. And this function was to raise pristine fishes and vegetables, or organic, if you will, for a wealthy class of people in the society. But the more I began to think about the society, the context outside this walled community, the more I realized I had to write about the whole thing, instead of just focusing on this smaller community. It wouldn't make any sense. Right. It became clear to me to just write about that community and not go beyond the walls. Right. And so one of the ways I do that is to follow the story of this one girl named Fan who decides to go outside the wall. She has a mission of her own, but through her we get to see what else is going on.
Right, and I wanted to ask you a little bit about how you build that world outside. We're following Fan as she journeys to first the counties and then the charter territories. The counties are sort of these lawless areas. Right. Can you talk a little bit about how you built that world and what inspired it?
Yeah, Elizabeth mentioned, and I think she was right, sort of a road story. And I kind of embrace that, and there, of course, road stories are those are the legendary stories that we have, from Canterbury Tales. So I kind of embraced that. I thought, well, given the structure that suggests to me, I tried not to kind of engineer the world beforehand and then have her reveal it to us. Mm-hmm. I kind of tried to let myself, as the writer, go with her, sort of follow along with her, and to see what kind of characters, beasts, strange cultures, strange practices that she would find out mm-hmm. there. But what's nice about that, there are two things about it. What's fun about that is that it's always this process of discovery, which is very exciting. The drawback is that you have no idea where you're going and what you're going to do. So you have to kind of have faith in the idea that she will discover a particular character, say, a former veterinarian who now is the only doctor in this open counties place where there's really no government oversight or any kind of resources. So say, for example, she meets that person, but that person, of course, contains an entire existence, right? An entire culture himself. And then, so that's, in a way, that's how I began to fill out this world, not by thinking about the world first, but thinking about particular individuals in the world and who those individuals were and how they fit into it.
Were there characters that you created that just kind of didn't go anywhere or didn't?
Yeah,
Yeah.
there are certain episodes that I wrote that weren't included in the book, and mostly those because I think this is what I usually find with as I write novels, is that I found myself slightly repeating myself. You know, maybe this character is showing too much of the same thing about that component of this world, and I wanted to show something different. So I showed, you know, through that former veterinarian, I showed something about this wild and, you know, unregulated territory. And then a different kind of character would come from this very wealthy 0.1% enclave and all its pleasures and problems.
Right. You mentioned the 0.1%. Was Zuccotti Park and the 99% 1% thing going on around the time that you were writing this?
Well, I can't remember now, but I don't know if that language was there. But this is something, and this is something that people had asked me about this book. Is again, did you have this whole set of notions about our present political and cultural and economic climate, and then just want to write a book about it? And I just have to say no, I really didn't. But you know, I think of myself as someone who tries to read as much as he can about what's going on. I'm a very avid newspaper reader, and so I think all my anxieties, all my concerns, all my worries about everything that's going on, from the climate to the economy and to class structures to, you know, all these things would just arise via these characters and via these moments. And once I began to see the pattern of that I was laying down for myself, I guess I just followed through with it, and to go into all these, you know, areas.
Yeah. One of the anxieties in the book that's particularly prominent is the notion of access to success. The students are tested and have to perform to break into the next level of society. As an instructor or professor at Princeton, is that something that you've been worried about or consumed with?
Oh yeah, I mean that's you know, my students at Princeton are the kids who have won that challenge, right? I mean, and you know, good friends of mine here, great friends of mine here, their daughter goes to New Trier High School,
right?
Which is you know, supercharged, huge high school, very competitive. So that everything, you have to do everything right just to get into the position to move forward, quote unquote, right? To be able to get to the certain schools that are on your list, and that's just the way, unfortunately, our society has become.
Yeah.
And so there's a lot of anxiety, particularly by the haves in my book,
right?
About these kinds of metrics,
right.
If to use the old Quran term, and it's funny because the people that have the most in this novel are the ones who probably are the most neurotic, the most worried, because they have everything to lose, and there's no safety net in this world. So if and that's one of the reasons why one of the characters ends up in the open counties where, you know, you have to live hand to mouth, is that once you've lost it, and there's no real way to get it back. Again, as mentioned, there's no mobility in this novel. And I think the scariest thing about that is the people in this novel accept it.
Right.
They accept that that's the fact. You know, I guess we in our society don't accept that. Although maybe more and more we're starting to realize, well, maybe mobility is more a story that we'd like to believe, the way things are, I think, as constituted.
Right. Let's talk a little bit about the first person plural narrative, the use of we. That seems a challenging sort of narrative form to use. Can you talk about why you chose that and what the challenges or the benefits of using it were?
Yeah, I got onto it pretty quickly. You know, of course, I could have very easily told the story through the girl fan's point of view, just had her, you know, say, I did this and I did that. Or I could have just told it in third person about her. And I tried that for a little bit. But I realized that, and going back to what I mentioned earlier about the origins of the book, I really did want to write a book about a community and the ethos and consciousness of a community that was, you know, left to its own devices and developing in certain, I hoped, interesting ways. And so to get at that consciousness, I decided that perhaps the we would be most appropriate for that and avail me a lot of different angles into that society. The thing about the we is that I think as we normally encounter it, it can be sort of monolithic, where we is always, you know, kind of the moralizing, you know, kind of element, or omniscient in certain ways. And I decided early on, after writing certain sketches, that the we would be less monolithic, that the we would be slightly unstable, not so sure of itself at times, at other times very sure of itself, at other times moralizing, at other times vague about those sorts of issues and ethics, that it could contain a lot of individual kinds of textures. Mm-hmm. And for me, that was part of the real fun of the novel, to tell you the truth. You know, because it's always, a novel is always about things, but formally it has to be engaging for the writer, I think. I'm not just there to tell this story, but I hope, I mean, that's why I became a writer, to tell a story in a particular way. And that the way of telling that story, you know, is integral to what that story is.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So there are definitely questions about freedom going on in this novel. Fan as an icon for freedom, but it's not so much necessarily political freedom as much as sort of almost a moral freedom. Could you speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, it's a more fundamental freedom.
Yeah.
It's beyond the context of a society, almost.
Right.
I think in this society, in this world that I describe, I think people are, they're in great want, mm-hmm. of different things. Certain people want of just the basic necessities. Other people are in want of certitude. Mm-hmm. Other people are in want of, you know, love. And I think that maybe the most chilling thing about this book as I began to write it, and you know, one is a reader of one's own novel, and you discover, even in the middle of it, what it's really about. And I think a lot of this book is about the idea that people don't have a lot of liberty mm-hmm. in our world, that we're so subject to the both visible and invisible forces of our society, whether through laws, taxation practices, the environment, what have you. Mm-hmm. And that all these people are looking for a sense of both respite from that, but a way to, I guess, make their voices known. Mm-hmm. And a lot of that in this novel is expressed through, you know, little moments of maybe even artistic expression. People are drawing murals and you know, doing other kinds of civil disobedience in a very mild way.
Right.
But people need to. I think there's this urge to be right. without being subject to, you know, all this the weight of the world.
Right.
Yeah.
I thought actually you speak of mild forms of civil disobedience. The scene where Fan and somebody from the charter community, the more controlled, wealthy community, go out and find sort of like a food truck set up. And
a food fair.
The food fair,
yeah,
right,
yeah.
right. Your use of food is very interesting in this novel.
Yeah.
And are you sort of a food lover? I hate the word foodie, but...
Yeah, I am a food lover. I've always been. And the food in this novel is kind of central, actually.
Yeah.
Because it's the one place where I think people can feel most natural. And in that scene that you mentioned, she takes this charter person, a one percenter, if you will, out from his very controlled and climate controlled sort of community, metaphorically also, to go out and try these wild, unregulated foods like blueberry pie, and
Right.
that's from blueberries picked outside, and so there's a danger there because the environment isn't so great. But there's I guess food for me in the novel and also in life is this elemental activity and also region of one's soul, and that we can't be denied. I mean, we try to all the time, because of dietary reasons or whatever, but it is one thing that can be just purely animal in a way, and that to me is something that seemed to be something that these folks, could appreciate.
Yeah. Let's talk a little bit about Native Speaker, which is now 20 years old this year, which doesn't seem possible.
If you look on the back of Native Speaker, there's a picture of me from 20 years ago. You can see it's been a while.
I was wondering, could you speak a little bit about how that book has sort of evolved for you over the past 20 years and how you view it now with more experience and time?
Well, I haven't read the book in its entirety in a long time. I'll sometimes have to be asked to read snippets of it. But the book is used a lot and assigned a lot in classes in high school and college. And so a lot of people, even if they don't read my other work or have read my other work, particularly younger people, have come across it that way. And that's kind of interesting. Very gratifying in one way, and we always think that you always hope as a writer that you're, and we write all for, I suppose, different reasons, but I think most literary writers understand that we're not writing for money in the end. That's not why we did it. We just love stories and we love language, and so it's wonderful to think that that it is assigned so that people sort of have to read it, and that maybe if you put it in front of them, not that they'll become fans of mine or anything, I don't care about that, but that some part of my concerns from that time are still being kind of reviewed, and maybe with skepticism, but sometimes with pleasure, and that's really wonderful. And it's something that I can talk about with a lot of complete strangers who, again, might not have ever wanted to, might not have even been great readers, but they took a class and maybe remembered it, and that's kind of wonderful.
Yeah. Can you talk a little bit about your writing habits, like day to day? How do you write a book? Where do you go? What does that look like for you?
Yeah, I try to, with novels, I don't write short fiction. I do write sometimes short nonfiction, autobiographical stuff. But because I write long form narrative, I find that if I don't work at it a little bit every day, or if I'm not actually writing, really think about it for a good couple hours that day, the whole thing kind of is always at risk of dissipating. Mm-hmm. It's like this sphere of gas that I have to constantly feed or protect, and if I don't do that, because it is a whole universe that you're creating, it all has to continually hang together in your mind so that you can somehow discover it or describe it. And if you can't hold it there, and writers know, and I've had this problem, of course, countless times, it just doesn't feel convincing to you that what you're saying about it is true. So it has to exist out there first, and then your brain can kind of, I don't know, tangle with it. And so I try to work every day, and my full work days are just, I make breakfast for the family, and then I go to my office. And the days I teach, I do teach. I try to teach in the afternoons or the evenings, and again, do a few hours, and then go teach. I can never write after I teach, because my brain is just fried, and then it's a different activity.
Right.
My teaching is all about them, and what they need, and what I need to say about their work, and how I need to maybe advise them or lead them in the reading of some story. But when I'm writing, it's just, it's all about me, and we're all narcissists, are the writers, but it has to be that way.
Yeah. Does one inform the other, though, or not so much?
I hope not.
Yeah.
Not that I hope I don't give myself. I try not to give myself any advice as I'm writing. I still want to try to preserve the way I wrote when I was 18 years old, which is writing blind and with, some kind of zeal. Mm-hmm. But, because I don't think you want to be too studied in what you do. And so I do very much try to wall off the two activities. And I found a way to do that, I think, over the years, I hope.
Yeah. Can you talk a little bit about what the research is for a book like this versus, say, some of your books with more historical grounding? Yeah.
Well, again, a lot of the research was on the ground in Shenzhen that I mentioned, although, all that factory research that I did, which was great to see, I didn't use for this novel, because it's not the same kind of stuff. But again, research is never wasted, I think. Even though I went to see this factory that made little tiny electrical motors and did not describe that factory in this book, what I did describe, what I did take from that research in Shenzhen was, again, a certain kind of feeling about that community. And that feeling about that community is as it resided in the individuals, and how they held themselves in their work, and how they spoke to one another, how tired they looked. And that kind of stuff, which is the real human stuff, that's when I think research is really important. But, other novels like The Surrendered, or which is set in the Korean War, or my second novel, A Just Your Life, which is set back in World War II, partly, I did have to do a lot of research just to make sure that I didn't get anything wrong. And you don't want to do that. Those aren't historical novels in that sense.
Right.
They're not meant to be some kind of, substitute for, real scholarship into those things. But I wanted to set it within that and make sure that the world held together and was accurate enough, and that all the things that could happen in a book that's set in the Korean War could happen. Right. That someone who had experienced that would say, no, that just can't happen.
Right. Okay, so I think we're going to start taking audience questions in a few minutes, but there will be folks coming around with microphones soon. But before we do that, we got a couple of in advance that I thought we would do while folks get ready. This person asks, who is your biggest influence?
As a writer, I guess?
As a writer, I suppose.
Well, my mother, otherwise, that's absolutely true,
Why was she such obviously she's your mother, but is there something you can say about?
Oh, yeah, my mother died a long time ago, when I was 26. But before then, she and I had a really wonderful relationship. Contentious a lot sometimes, and I think it's just because we felt so close. And there was something about, I think we both felt like we were sort of twins of each other in a weird way. And we'd get frustrated at the same things. But she was a very proud and impressive woman. And I knew that even then as a boy. You know, she was actually, she played for the Korean national basketball team. And she was kind of a beauty queen as well. And so she was a very, you know, she was actually in Time magazine, 1950s or something, a picture of her, which I have. And, but at the same time, she was also, because of where we were as immigrants in New York without any family or network of people, and she didn't speak English very well, she was someone who was also, in that context of her life, quite scared and uncertain and tentative. And so I kind of always felt the drama of her life, because I knew inside she was this one person. But, you know, it's so powerful, and maybe this is why I always write about it, is context is so powerful for who we are, who we think we are. And so, you know, for me, and, you know, just as a child does, you just watch your parents all the time. And she never talked about these things, but I could just see them being played out. And I knew, you know, all the things that she was and wasn't and hoped to be. So, yeah.
What about writers?
I guess influence would suggest, you know, when I was younger or something, or more formative. And I would say that there are a couple of writers in my youth that I really got jazzed by, and maybe two of them would be Whitman and Joyce. I loved Leaves of Grass, even though I didn't understand a lot of it when I was reading it in my teens. But I felt the energy of it, the sense of possibility, the sense of inclusion. To me, it was a very American voice, and I was searching out American voices. And then Joyce, earlier Joyce, for, you know, Joyce of Portrait of the Artist and Dubliners. Less so in terms of influence, his Finnegan's Wake and Ulysses, but again there, just that's kind of soulful lyricism, questioning, searching for a certain kind of spiritual center. Yeah, but via language. And I'd always been someone who loved the language. So I think that's what I would say is, you know, in terms of literary influence, you know, writers who really have a palpable relationship with their own work, with their own kind of lyric. And I like that. Yeah.
I think over here.
It's hard to see.
Yeah.
How would you compare Chinese and American capitalism from your experience in China?
It seems like, and this is part of China's great strength, or great just force, is that really anything goes, right? I mean, it's unfettered. Now there will be crackdowns and there'll be changes of rules where, you know, people are jailed or something, but it's a place where, and the story I'm writing now is actually follows the tale of a Chinese American businessman, a friend of mine, inspired by a friend of mine, and I would say that there's this sort of relentless energy, and a sense in China and from Chinese business people that there really is no limit to what can be sold, done, made. You know, it's just life is too hard there, and I think they've just been used to that. And I don't know. I guess I don't really know what American capitalism is anymore. You know, I think I'm afraid of what American capitalism is, which is, you know, some of us are allowed to rig the system slightly to our favor, and we take advantage of it. That happens in China, of course, in a big way. But in the margins, in the little guy, until he gets squashed by some bigger guy who doesn't like what he's doing, there seems to be just a lot of that kind of energy, which is really, quite animating, and it's kind of heartening in a way. So that's what I would say.
Yeah.
Again, I'm no expert. It's just how I see it.
Okay. Back.
I'm a huge fan. And she's a teenage girl, so I just wondered if there's someone that you know that influenced that character. Is she based on someone?
Well, when I was thinking about this story, I wanted to write a story, actually, not a children's story, but I wanted to write a story that my daughters could read. And that they could, that I'd hope that they could identify with. And so I was thinking about my daughters, and at the time they were, 11 and 14, or a little older than that, maybe 13 and 15 or something. Right? And so I did think about, and that's one of the reasons why I decided to have her as the hero of this novel. She doesn't say much, she's a strange kind of hero in that she's not someone we hear from. She's not a thought leader. She's not a smart alecky kind of guide to the universe. She's more a kind of vessel for us as she goes throughout this world, and a vessel for everyone in the story. A true innocent that kind of reflects everyone who interacts with her, and reflects their goodness and their darkness. So I was thinking about, my daughters then, and how innocent they are going about this world we live in, and how both they'd be influenced, and that one hopes how they would, kind of influence the world too. Yeah.
What did they think of it? Did they read it?
No. they don't. They try not to read my. It's too psychologically hairy to read your dad think about something. It's just.
Up front to your right.
Yeah.
I noticed that from book to book, your style changes. How do you come up with a new style? And also, why don't you think you see more Asians in the arts?
Well, I like playing with style, and I'm playing with forms and kinds of stories. I guess it's just from the fact that I've always been a lifelong avid reader, and liked a lot of kinds of stuff, and so, and I get bored as a writer. I hope that all my books are cousins to each other in some substantive way, but for me, just in terms of artistic interest and the way I can sustain my energy, I need something absolutely new each time. So this new book I'm writing is more a picaresque story. But I'm hoping to kind of deform that too. And then Asians in the arts, I think it's you're seeing a lot more and more, because our community in America, many of us, of course, many Chinese and Japanese came over long ago in smaller numbers and have settled mostly in the West. But since 1965, which was the Immigration Act of 1965, which is how my family came over in the late 60s, we are still a fairly young community, generationally. And as all immigrant communities, I think, we tend to look for stability and security in our vocations. And of course, that's how I was raised. I was not raised to be a writer, an artist. Writing and the arts were, lauded and celebrated in my house, but that was for other people to do.
What was your first career?
Well, I did end up working on Wall Street after college for a year, but that was just a dance, a quick dance.
Was that for your parents, or?
Yeah, that was for all of us, really.
Yeah.
It was about the dream.
Okay.
But one realizes the dream is not the dream, right? It's something else. And I think I think you'll see a lot more Asian artists in America, ethnically Asian artists coming to the fore in the next generation or two. Yeah.
How do you help yourself from procrastinating? At the beginning, I know now you have but how does a
When I
writer-
was starting to write, or well, it still is an issue, procrastination. I mean, because writing is not. I mean, you cannot. People say, "Is it fun?" And it's not fun. It's not fun at all. It makes you sweat. It makes you think you're nothing. It makes you think. It's very emotionally fraught work, but you get used to that. It's because you're constantly failing. And I asked a musician once. She was a pianist, and we were listening to her stuff, and I said, "God, that sounds so fun. That what you just did there." And she said the exact same thing I'm saying to you. That was a horror show. To keep it all together and to make it sound like that. That's a horror show. And so that I think is, that's something that you have to maybe let your students know, is that it's going to be difficult stuff. But if you have a real interest in it, if you want to call that love, that's great. And just an obsession. And writers and artists tend to be obsessive people about one thing. That one thing that they can't stop doing, that they can't, for whatever reason. And the ones who don't end up doing it is that, they allow or let that obsession die, in them somehow.
The massive migration that's occurring in the Middle East, has that given you pause maybe for another novel?
Well, it's definitely something that I've just, really, I would say last week, because I read, again, a lot of newspapers, and of course, we've all been talking about it, but the scale of what's going on there, and the continued scale of what's going on there, and how we can trace this happening, all through everything that's happened over the last 15 years since 9/11 and before that, is something that I think we're just starting to get a grips on a little bit. And so just as a novelist, I'm always looking for stuff, but I'm not probably going to write about it, but it is something that I have thought about and thinking this is actually a moment in history that will be noted for a long time. And because I have a feeling that it's going to tell us about this time, not just about all these, poor people, miserable and tragic, the tragic things that are happening to them, but everything that had come before this, and the seeds of this, which of course has happened throughout history, but is of course intimate to us. Yeah.
When you have, let's call it, for lack of any other words, an aha moment, that you make a poignant observation to yourself, do you have a way of writing it down, of taking a photograph and saying, that was powerful, and someday it's going to be a powerful moment in my book, which will be leading to other things?
Yeah, I'm not a person who carries a journal. And I'm uncomfortable taking photographs of people, especially if I know that I might be writing about them. It's weird, right? But I think I note things to myself, and I think I trust myself that if I've noted it and I come back to it and it sticks without my trying or putting it down, that it's something that is going to last, and that's something that I'll remember. And I've over the years, I've collected those things. And the ones that don't really last, I guess, for me, in my sense, aren't meant to be written about. It's the ones that do last. Like the other day, I don't know if this is going to last, but it was it was just a strange little photograph in my mind. I live in San Francisco now. I'm on sabbatical from Princeton, and so I was in San Francisco and walking the streets, and there was this homeless person sitting on the street with his head, actually, I don't know if it was him or her, an older person, not wearing much clothing, with his or her head in her hands. And right beside her was a full bag of her or his things that it was a Whole Foods bag. And of course, that's obvious of what all the kind of ironies it suggests, but it said something to me about our society in San Francisco today, and also just all the things that are going on, right?
Like, for example, I believe in insatiable curiosity, and
Yeah,
that within that insatiable curiosity, you're going to see things that are both meaningful to the moment, and then particularly as a writer, which can then be a springboard to other things.
And again, if it's something that I particularly am going to latch on to and continue to think about, I think that any image or any notion contains many potential things. So obviously there's this one, the surface level of that picture I just described to you, says one thing. But if you really go into it and into it, and as a writer who's interested is want to do, then a whole other story and a whole other set of notions come out of that, right? One hopes that make it more complicated, more subtle, and maybe more truthful. Yeah.
Great. Well, thank you all for coming, and thank you, and congratulations.
Thank you.